to Collie Conversations, our quick, focused 15-minute Friday Q&A where I answer your real-life Border Collie questions and help you make sense of the behaviour you're seeing at home and out on walks. Every week we take one simple idea, understanding your collie better, so life gets calmer, easier and more connected. So today we're covering how to break down stress around roadside walks, whether counterconditioning works for anxiety around children and baby noises, and what to do when your puppy discovers the joy of chewing mud on long line adventures. My aim for these sessions is the same every Friday. Short, clear, practical guidance you can use straight away. Let's get into it. Alexa, timer for 15 minutes, please.
15 minutes, starting now.
All right. So the first question came from one of my students, Janie Monks, and she says, "Hi, Gemma. We have made massive leaps forward. Let's start again. We have made massive leaps forward. Still struggle with walks, especially near roads. He's fine early morning before roads get too busy, and good away from roads too. But when he even knows we are going out at a time where there will be cars around, he pulls from straight out of the front door. He's literally on his side, scraping along the tarmac. It's horrible to see. Any ideas how we break this down to manage his stress levels? Currently using harness and 2-point lead from Perfect Fit." All right, so first off, I'm really pleased that you've got what I would consider to be the right kit, because that's going to be helpful in terms of making sure that he's kind of doing the best loose lead walking that he can possibly do. Stress levels wise though, what we need to look at is why particularly the trigger and being around any sort of cars, how we reduce some of that stress around that particular trigger. So one of the things that I would encourage you to look into as a club student is the Holly Barker archives, as I like to think of them, where Holly Barker, who is a canine nutritionist, comes and talks to the club once a month, and she talks about different supplements that we can use to help our dogs, dogs that are anxious, dogs that are worried about things, and generally sort of bring their base levels down a little bit. What we tend to find is that if we have a dog that is anxious about one thing, they are probably anxious about other things as well, but it's just maybe that one big thing that we particularly notice. But whilst their system is running a bit hot, as I like to think of it, the reason I think of it as running a bit hot is because if you think about a kettle boiling, it's quite a good analogy, isn't it, for a border collie that is starting to work themselves up into a frenzy. What we're aiming to do is reduce that temperature down. We're hoping for something slightly cooler, slightly calmer in terms of their demeanour and how they approach the world. So the sorts of supplements that immediately spring to mind and are things that Holly has talked about numerous times, and in fact, for those people that are not in the club and want to follow Holly, she has something called the Sports Dog Nutrition Facebook group. It's a brilliant resource, so it's well worth going and having a look there. But one of the first things that I know that she would suggest is chamomile. Simple chamomile, going along to your local supermarket and getting chamomile tea bags, ripping open the top of them and emptying the contents into a bowl with maybe some yogurt or some dog-friendly peanut butter. Just mix it up in a paste and offering it to the dogs that way. The dosage and things you'll find in the club archives, and for those of you listening, as I say, Holly has those details on her Facebook group. But that would be one of the first things that I would think about doing if you haven't already, because in order to be able to look to change this type of behaviour, which clearly is something which is a big trigger from his point of view, what we need to do is we need to make things a bit calmer to start with, because it's really difficult to take on board new information whilst you're stressed and worried, and just generally life is a bit difficult. So that would be the first thing. What I would then think about is going, okay, where can I go where I can control looking at cars a bit more? So when we go out of our front door, depending on where we live, of course, if we know that we kind of have a relatively busy road that we walk along, then there isn't much that we can do about it. The pavement is a very narrow thing here in the UK. I know my friends in the US will testify to the fact it's a bit different over there. But here in the UK, humans and dogs are very close to the actual traffic going backwards and forwards. So one of the things that I would look to do is to come up with a list of places where I could go and watch traffic at a distance. And I'm assuming, and I might be wrong here, so you can tell me later in the Facebook group if I'm incorrect, but assuming he's okay in the car. And there are lots of border collies that really quite like to travel in their cars, and so their vehicles become a safe place. One of the things that I would do is I would park myself at the far end of a car park, and I would just sit and watch some traffic coming in and out of the car park. The benefit of going somewhere like a car park is that, generally speaking, I mean, you never rule out human behaviour, of course, but generally speaking, cars will be travelling quite slowly. Depending on the time of day that you go, you can predict, reasonably well how many cars there might be there. If we choose a really big supermarket car park, so funny enough, when I've set this kind of homework for people in the past, they've tried somewhere like a Lidl or an Aldi, and I love a Lidl and Aldi, brilliant places to shop. But in terms of their car park, from a border collie perspective, they tend to have smaller car parks, and it tends to be a lot of comings and goings. There's quite a quick turnover. So I would personally choose somewhere like one of the enormous big, large Tesco type supermarkets. Sainsbury's sometimes do a really big supermarket. Something where it's like a hyper supermarket, where you've got a really big car park where you can go to the one end and be a long way from things. And to start with, you might just sit with, all the doors shut and we're just working on being calm in kind of that environment to begin with. Then we might move to having the boot open and sitting on the back of the boot with him and just watching things from a distance. Then we might progress to coming out of the boot and doing some of the exercises that he knows really well and he's been doing really well at home in that different environment. What we're trying to work out for him is, where is there a kind of primary school level environment? What he's saying when you step out the front door and it's busy, he's saying that's PhD. That's really hard. I can't do that. But what we need to see is, can we find somewhere that is a bit more primary school? And the beauty of somewhere like a car park like that is that it can be quieter or busier, depending on where we park ourselves in the car park. So yeah, that's where I would think about moving things along with him. So let me know how you get on with that. Right, Natalie had a question. She says, "Hi Gemma, what are your thoughts around counterconditioning and desensitisation? Bonnie gets super anxious around the noise of young children and babies and is lunging and barking at them when out and about. Would playing her noises of children at home help, or videos on the TV? I ask this as I have a daughter who has special needs and was petrified of fireworks. She desensitised by watching videos of fireworks on YouTube, which has helped her get over this fear. Does this work in our border collies? Thanks." So it can, if we have a good sound system. So funnily enough, I can't remember which conversation this came up in. I think it was one of the Q&A sessions where we were talking about, I'll start by just saying, so desensitisation is the process where we have a scary thing. Let's say we're scared of spiders, but every time we see a spider, somebody gives us, a delicious chocolate. Okay. So what we start to do is no, that's rubbish. That's counterconditioning. Sorry, I'm getting my terms muddled up. Counterconditioning is where we have something that the dog is frightened of. So as I say, I'm going to use a spider, for example. But every time we see a spider and we're worried about it, we are presented with this chocolate. So what we do is we're aiming to change the emotional response when we see that spider. Because to start with, the spider equals scary things. But after enough repetitions of a delicious chocolate being presented at the time of the spider, assuming that the human being that is frightened of the spider likes chocolate, then it can become more positive over time. Okay, so that's counterconditioning. Desensitisation is the process where we would have the sound of fireworks running really low to start with, okay, and then we would gradually build up the volume of the fireworks gradually over time, as the dog showed us that they were accustomed and more comfortable with it. And counterconditioning and desensitisation tend to work together, which is why I'm sorry for getting muddled up. That's why sometimes we can get a bit muddled up about which process is which. So the desensitisation process, when I tried it with my border collie Kai, who was incredibly frightened of fireworks to the point where he once injured himself. He cut himself underneath underneath one of his eyes, trying to I guess from his perspective, escape and get into a small space. The process didn't work for him because I could have the fireworks up super loud during the day on a like a tape recorder or something like that, showing my age and Kai's age. But it didn't make any difference to him. That didn't bother him at all. The sound of what was coming out of that little, speaker was not the same as the sound. And I would say probably the vibration. We certainly in the past week or so have had fireworks where we've gone, wow, like that vibrated in the window. So desensitization has its place, but it works better if we have good speakers. So, as I say, that's not my area of expertise. That's maybe something to go into somewhere like a sound shop and chat to people about what the purpose of what you're after is, to see whether or not that would help. That said, I know of some dogs, and actually I think on the occasions that it has worked, it's been male dogs. This is a very small study. I can think of 2 dogs that I'm thinking of. Although Kai was a male dog and that didn't work for him. But I do know one of Vodka and Toddy's puppies. He was out for a walk with me, and it just so happened that a ambulance went past. And when the ambulance went past, he put his head back and he started howling. And my husband was curious to see whether or not this could be repeated by playing it on an iPhone. And it did initially work. But very quickly he went, oh, that's not the same. So desensitization, as I say, can work to a degree. But what we don't take into account is it's probably not just the sound. It's probably a combination of the sound. It's probably a combination of the vibration of, the children's voices in the air. It's probably to do with the smell of children and, their sudden movements. That's the sort of stuff that's bothering them as much as it is about the fact that, it's the sound. So it's not a blanket, no, it won't work. And I know that there are trainers and behaviourist friends of mine that have had great success in changing dogs' opinions about particular sounds. So I wouldn't rule it out altogether, but I would say that I have personally, and certainly have had students that have found similar to me, that it depends, I think, on the sound system to a degree, which is as I say, a thing that I'm not particularly familiar with. Anybody that does know about sound systems that wants to comment underneath this, perfect. We'd love to have your experience, but like I say, I'm afraid that's not my bag. And as Flash Warden very helpfully pointed out underneath Natalie's post, she did say there is a tiny bit on using counterconditioning and desensitization in one of the loose lead walking videos. So yeah, absolutely, you can go and have a look at that resource in the club. There is also, if you type in counterconditioning in the club website, it will bring you up a video which just explains a little bit more. So if you want a little bit more clarification, then yeah, go and take a look at that. Right then, our final question is from Pat, who is one of my students in the club. And she says, morning, Gemma. Not sure if this question is too late, but if you could fit it in, great. I'm taking Ruby out on a long line to explore and start recall, and it's all going well. However, she has a fascination for leaves and clumps of mud. The leaves are not so much of an issue and seem great for her to chase and play with. But now, because the leaves are so wet and not being blown around, she's taken more and more to grabbing large clumps of mud and chewing away on them. Obviously, I get them out of her mouth when I can, or try and distract her with a tuggy. Often the mud wins. I wonder how much of a problem this is as to whether or not it's something she'll grow out of. As a puppy, I want her to explore as much as possible. So, here's the thing. From my perspective, I don't tend to freak out when my puppies put stuff in their mouths. Now, if you're a vet or a vet nurse watching this who has maybe had to, deal with blockages and that kind of thing, I can understand you going, whoa, Gemma, blockages are a thing. And they are. So I don't want to say that they're not. But one of the things that I have found through raising very many puppies of my own, but also in working with students, is that when we make a beeline for something that is in a dog's mouth, the dog has basically 2 responses. Either they can share what's in their mouth, or if they think it's going to be taken away, they can run off with it or swallow it quick. Okay? And my husband's dog Moss, I remember once I saw her, she'd got close to a bag which I knew had some training treats in. And I saw her and I did what I would do with one of my dogs. I went, Moss, what you doing? It wasn't like I'm cross with you or anything like that sort of way, but I sort of, let her know that I had noticed. And suddenly she'd gone from exploring to then just swallowing, like getting it down her throat as quickly as she could. And I would suspect that my husband and I have slightly different ways of dealing with a dog that has something in its mouth that they shouldn't. And from Moss's perspective, she was like, do you know what? It's going to get taken off me. I'd best get this down my mouth as quickly as I possibly can. So my approach is, what did you got? Oh my goodness, did you find some mud? Oh, hang on a minute. I'm going to go and have a look over here. I'm going to maybe scrabble in the grass myself. What's it? And I will maybe go and find something else to explore instead. I will also use the fact that the puppy likes to be in proximity to me. So if I start walking away from wherever the leaves are or wherever the mud are, I would expect what my dad used to say was the elastic band effect. I would expect that the elastic band would start to tighten, and what the puppy is likely to do is to go, oh, I can't be that far away from you. Oh, I must, the pull of mum moving will take me with her. That doesn't mean, of course, that they can't pick up the mud and take that with them, but it's much less likely to suddenly get swallowed. And the nature of puppies is, I often joke about the fact that, oh, there's a butterfly, oh, easily distracted. So I think when we focus less on, oh my gosh, you've got that in your mouth and I need to get that out, and more on, let's just move on, let's go and see if there's anything else going on, let's see if there's something different, then often the problem kind of resolves itself. The thing I would watch for with any border collie puppy, any herding breed puppy actually, is anything where they're getting obsessive, be that water, be that leaves, be that digging, anything like that. That's something that I would definitely want to look into in a bit more depth. But if it's just gentle exploration, then that's fine. As a club student, what I would suggest is that if you're unsure about whether or not it's looking obsessive or not, just get me a short video and post it in the Facebook group, and we can have a look at it there. All right. Right, okay, so that's our 15 minutes done. Thank you for being here and caring enough about your collie to keep learning. If you want your question answered in a future session, just drop it under the regular Thursday morning post in the free Facebook group. That's where I pick them up from each week. And if you're watching or listening on replay, it would mean a lot if you could rate or review the podcast on the platform that you're using. It helps more collie owners find this support, and it genuinely makes a difference. I'll see you next Friday for another quick Q&A. Have a brilliant week with your collie meantime.